Hey there, everybody. So I haven't been uploading here as often as I would like. On my main channel, I look to do every 3 weeks to a month. On this one, considering it's just kind of an odds and ends off the wall channel, I'd like to do things closer to every week at least. I haven't been doing that quite as much as I would like for a couple reasons. One, I still have this compulsion to try to prepare a little more than I should and polish a little more for a channel like this one. This is supposed to just be all fun, and I still have trouble getting myself just to sit down and wing it. So I'm working on that. Also, time's just limited, and sometimes I pour a little more of my time into getting a big project done. I will try to balance that all out. I don't know how much people care or even notice that I put things here, but that's just what I'm personally trying to do. One little off-the-wall thing I've been wanting to talk about for a while is the Star Wars prequels. Now, I know I'm very late to the game on this one. This one's pretty much been played out. I think most of what can be said about this has been said. So I don't know if anybody even wants to hear anything more about this. But there's a problem with the prequels that I don't think I've seen people focus on, and I've just wanted to give my 2 cents, I guess. Now, you probably haven't heard me talk about Star Wars, and largely it's just because I don't care that much. A lot of you might not like hearing me say that. I used to be a really, really, really big fan, but with time, I've just come to see them as like pretty good to varying degrees, but really overblown. The first movie was groundbreaking. It was interesting. A lot of stuff came together. It's still kind of basic in terms of a lot of filmmaking stuff. Empire Strikes Back was about as good as a space opera movie could be. Return of the Jedi is coasting a lot on its reputation as part of the original trilogy, in my opinion. But now, to me, it's just a couple of pretty good old sci-fi movies, and it's been very badly diluted with all of its, online streaming options and stuff like that. But it's still kind of an interesting thing, even if not for the content, which the content is interesting, but just for the place it plays in society. And honestly, at the crux of this is the prequels. I think they're in this weird pivotal part in the history of Star Wars, and what they're like and what they meant to people, it's just one of the weirdest and most fascinating pop culture phenomena. And I think there's a ton of hyperbolic and frankly immature discourse around these movies from both sides, whether you really like it or really hate it. And it's interesting. I think somebody could do like an anthropological project on this at some point, looking back. One thing people take for granted is that there is a sense of letdown surrounding the prequels, that people had expectations and those were dashed. But I'm not sure people really understand the extent of it. They see it as people like the old Star Wars movies. They had some combination, childhood nostalgic attachment to them and thought they were good, and the prequels didn't live up to their expectations, so they overreacted and said it ruined their childhoods. There's probably a lot of truth in that, but I think it simplifies some, because as somebody who grew up during that time, the amount of anticipation for some prequel story was just like crazy. It was in your head to a really bizarre extent. Ever since you saw the words Episode 4 attached to that first Star Wars movie, you just had this really deep, almost yearning to see what that original story was like. In fact, a lot of us as kids thought those movies existed, or some book version of them existed, and that Episode 4 thing was meant to be literal. And so, along with going for years and eventually, I think close to decades since you've seen a Star Wars movie, and just having them overblown as these big, huge, great works of art, and wondering what it'd be like to have more of it, you also have this just general pocket of highly mythologized pre-movie story, and wanting to see what that was like was just huge for people. And so the amount of letdown was, I think, more than people totally understand. When I went to watch it, I had big expectations. I remember sitting there in the theater trying to rationalize the movie to myself and just gradually feeling a little deflated about it. And then, of course, I dove into the it was terrible thing along with everybody else. And then this turned, of course, into a big dogpile thing. Plinkett did his review. I think that set a lot of the tone for a discourse, even though it was mostly what people already felt. And yeah, everyone hated on it in a way that's largely deserved, but I think disproportional. Like, who cares that much, right? Since there's been a little bit of a resurgence or rehabilitation of its reputation, maybe it's just because now everyone hates the sequel trilogy, all the newer movies. And so they're taking the place of the new bad thing along with all the online streaming stuff. And of course, a lot of people now have their nostalgias, inhabited by the prequels. That was their movies from when they were kids. And I think nostalgia does a lot of heavy lifting for all the Star Wars movies. The fact, though, is that these are pretty bad movies. I just don't think there's any way around that. Even if some people overblow it, even if some people simplify, I see very little redeeming value in the Star Wars prequel. And so what I wanted to share is I think a lot of this comes down to one basic thing. And I mean related to the story itself. There's one core part of the story that to me just makes it untenable. There's nothing to invest yourself in. Now, of course, I think the things that makes them most insufferable is the execution. The performances are flat and wooden, I think probably at Lucas's direction. There's a lot of that soap opera style reverse shot thing. Plinkett did a great review of this. And the fact that everyone's walking on small blue screen sets just makes the thing feel tiny. So a lot of walking and talking, sitting and talking. You've seen that whole routine if you've watched the Plinkett review. But that makes the whole thing just feel so wooden and boring. If you're not watching big cartoon, flashy animated scenes, you're watching people just sit around having dull conversations. And it's really hard to get past that. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about more of a story element. Also not talking about Jar Jar. I know it's easy to hate on him. I don't know how much this is still culturally relevant. I haven't really been in the prequel discourse over the last few years, but that was a big thing. I don't think he ruined those movies. All the movies had a silly character of one kind or another in them, or elements of silliness. If you go back and watch the original trilogy, R2-D2 and C-3PO are a little silly. The Ewoks, everyone kind of hated them in their time. And there's just a lot of silly lines and goofy elements. Okay, Jar Jar was worse, but I don't think he could have sunk a movie. He could have ruined the mood at certain points. But if the movies themselves were good, he would have been a minor annoyance in what was otherwise a good movie. So I think if I could point out one thing that I think just totally sunk these movies from square one, it's that the conflict was basically a joke on the main characters. There were a lot of big battles, and they were very elaborate battles. There's so much going on in every scene, as I forget the guy's name is. But why do we care about these battles? They are all engineered by the Emperor, like Palpatine or whatever. They're all engineered by him to install himself as a dictator. So, if there's a battle, it can't just be big and spectacular. I have a sense that they thought a battle belonged at certain places in the movies, but battles are supposed to be something where you care if one side wins over the other. When the whole thing is just the bad guy engineering something and everybody else is going through the motions, why does it matter? I just don't care who wins in a fight between proto-stormtroopers and bug people. So, the whole focus of the movie just feels like it's really off. I think really what should have happened is the main characters should have been invested in conflicts that mattered. So maybe have them go on some kind of side missions, have them, battles going on in the background while our main characters are fighting for their own survival or something like that. You could say that that was happening in the movies, and in everything I say, there's going to be some semantics where somebody could say some version of what I'm saying actually happened, or some version of what I'm arguing should happen was actually happening. But a lot of this, number one, I'd argue they aren't a lot of times, but then a lot of this is simply by degree, how much of the focus was on a certain thing and how much was something that should have been a core element of the movie just paid quick lip service to. So I think we need to review some core ideas of what's important for a movie. First, almost all movies depend on a core conflict where you are invested in the outcome. So you have a feeling that something's at stake and you care what happens. And then in order to get invested in this, you need to experience the movie along with a protagonist who has something at stake in it. So really you care because you're watching somebody who you care about. These movies are famously bad for making us care about the characters. That's been done to death too. People have analyzed that all over the place. But then there needs to be a plot where, even if you care about the character, if they're not in a conflict that you don't care about, then it's all for nothing anyway. All this rests on one big thing that this movie missed out on, or these movies missed out on. And it's so obvious that it's kind of embarrassing to even bring up. But that's that the protagonists themselves need to be aware of and invested in the conflict. And that was missing from these movies, and that's kind of absurd. I would say there are two main thrusts in the prequels. And these are two things that the movies were supposed to be driving at from the start, and it's something that the audiences going into these movies were going to be aware of from the start. And that is, number one, Anakin falling to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader, and number two, the Emperor corrupting the Republic and basically becoming a dictator and eventually the Emperor. I guess Palpatine is what his name was. I keep calling him the Emperor because, I'm from the old times and that's just what he was called. And the problem is that, yes, these topics reside in the movies, but the main characters are not aware of or invested in them, at least not to the extent that they should be in order for these movies to have dramatic coherence and focus and for us to be really invested in them. So what would it have looked like if these characters were actually properly invested? If they were involved in these conflicts on a level of personal awareness and then trying to fight back instead of just, wandering around not knowing what's going on. First, I think they should have, from the very beginning of the first movie, or close to it anyway, had some sense that something was wrong with Palpatine. So I think at the very start, maybe you open with some kind of conflict between the Republic and somebody else. Have it be one clearly defined enemy. Don't have this weird thing with like bug people and trade federations and all that kind of stuff. Narrow it down a little bit and simplify it. Maybe that is some actual dangerous enemy to some extent, but have the Emperor overblow the threat and just be clearly, setting himself up as a demagogue and a populist leader, and have the main protagonist have some awareness of that. Not a full awareness from the start, but there should be some growing unease that's triggered from somewhere in the first movie that this guy's a little off and we need to push back. And then have a lot of the tension be, when do they decide to push back? When do they start to take measured steps to start fighting him? What kind of fear do they feel in the middle of all that? Not just from the Emperor and his troops, but from society around them, if he's effectively setting himself up as a populist leader. There's a lot of room for tension and fear and conflict in there that we just miss out on because this conflict isn't really established early on and the characters don't care about it because they don't even know about it. The thing this movie is supposed to be about is sidelined, or we're experiencing it just as an audience, and there's just like a wholesale sense of dramatic irony where nobody knows what's going on. And so there's no tension around the main point of the movie. So they're actually fighting him, have them gradually maybe become fugitives as the movies go on. And I'd say focus on him mostly as a politician, not as a Sith Lord, because a lot of his rise to power was done as a politician. And I think having him be this Sith Lord and leading these, bad Jedi around and stuff like that, having the rule of two, and that just muddied things a lot. Focus on the political side of it, and then have it maybe be a reveal at the end that he actually is working with a dark side or something like that. I don't know. And then maybe have the character see that the battles he's starting are contrived. Don't muddy the stakes by having the protagonist participate fully enthusiastically in these battles that are just a joke on everybody, because we don't care. And when they don't know, they don't care properly about what's going on. So how do we invest in this story? Or maybe, have them not participate in the battles, maybe having them on little side missions where they're trying to subvert the Emperor's efforts while these battles are going on. It's hard to develop stakes because we know it's going to happen, but have some personal stakes on behalf of these protagonists. What is their experience like as they watch a totalitarian regime start to rise up? What could they do to make their situation better or worse? Or are there things they could feed into to help the resistance as we lead into the main movies? And on top of that, of course, it can just be the tragedy of watching them knowing they're going to fail, but you can invest your audience in that a little bit. And then with the second main thrust with Anakin, I think, and this has been said, have him start as a pretty good guy, but just gradually start to take turns and then have people be aware of those turns. Don't just have him being extremely annoying and then troubled in a sense that people have this vague sense of awareness of, and then suddenly go off the deep end and the whole time nobody knows what to do with him. You could have him, again, start as a good person, have him turn for intelligible reasons that are maybe kind of subtle but could lead him down a dark path. Have serious conversations between him and Anakin about it, and then have other people maybe argue over how to handle it, but have them be aware that this is happening. The whole time, the Jedi and whatever pre-resistance should know that Palpatine is trouble. They should know that Anakin is starting to slide as it happens, and they should be pushing back. I guess just have them be aware. It's as simple as that. This whole thing where characters were clouded by the dark side so they didn't have an effing clue what's going on, it wasn't just nonsense. It wiped out a feeling of stakes in the movie, because none of the good guys care and they're just wandering around being silly and being fooled the whole time. So we can see that something bad is happening, but when people are just wandering, I don't know, it's hard to care when the protagonists don't care. One big key thing here is when the characters do something, it should be with a sense of purpose, and it should be a sense of purpose related to the main dramatic thrusts of the movie. If you're going to have the Naboo thing, I think that was just a side quest. Yeah, sure. As a standalone movie, maybe you could care that, the good guys fight off the droid army or whatever it was. But it was just totally unrelated to the main thrust of the Emperor and stuff like that. I know that he was pulling strings in some way or whatever, but that battle itself, how that was resolved, didn't have anything to do with him becoming a totalitarian dictator. And we're just there to watch everyone meet Anakin, I guess. So, well, no big deal. I guess we're supposed to be experiencing a little bit of his childhood trauma, but you really don't need that to show him turning to the dark side, and the whole thing just felt extraneous. But if you're going to have that scene, have the Jedi or some other main characters know that the Emperor is engineering it, and have them going there for the purpose of trying to subvert that or expose the Emperor, Palpatine, whatever. But have them there for that purpose. Don't just have them wandering there on vague orders to investigate a trade federation or something and then just fight this tangential battle. Because the whole time, again, they're not aware of the main dramatic thrust of the movie and they're not fighting for it. When you have Obi-Wan go to that water planet and find out that they're making a clone army or something like that, don't just have him wander there based on some vague clue. Have him actually operating on deep suspicions of it. Have him and another group of Jedi know that this is happening and we got to go try to uncover what Palpatine's actually up to and have a sense of danger around it. They have to sneak over there because Palpatine might have his eye on them. He might know that they're going to stir up trouble, and have them recognize that he is going to use this army to take over and we got to expose this. And there can be a sense of drama to it, but then maybe also of helplessness because, you know, they know how he has the population wrapped around his finger and maybe they won't care. There's a lot you could do there. Maybe along the lines of how The Boys handles this kind of thing. Very imperfect story itself, but they could feel in a similar way the sense of social pressure closing in around themselves, of the bad guys being able to spin what they're doing with the public. And, you know, I don't know, there's a lot you could do there with the main characters aware of the problem and with that problem being central to the story. So that's my thoughts. Basically, don't have the movies and all the main conflicts be a prank by the bad guy on the main characters and us as an audience. When they're clueless, when the main conflicts aren't really the main conflicts, meaning the conflicts we're being shown aren't actually the core conflicts of the story, then nobody cares and you're just watching stuff. And that's the problem. You know, the prequels are very, very poorly executed. It's really hard to sit there and watch these dry wooden conversations between people and flash back and forth between that and just, you know, exaggerated, silly cartoon fights. But then when those fights aren't anything to do with what we're supposed to care about. Those are my thoughts about the prequels. I probably made some people mad. If you're really invested in Star Wars, this might be obvious to some people. I don't know if people have already talked about this specific point, but, you know, this is a thought I wanted to get off my chest, and here we are. So have a good day, everybody.